And welcome back to the First and Goal podcast. My name is Lewis, and next to me, as always, is my beautiful coach, Laraib. As we are finally here, Laraib, we have made it through 18 weeks of this regular season. We've been with you all the way through, and we are here on a Monday, no Monday Night Football this week, to break down the final week of the regular season, break down all the things that have happened on the infamous Black Monday, which is the day we are filming right now, and to look ahead at the playoffs. All the seedings are set. We know which teams are in what spots, and all the matchups are set for Super Wild Card Weekend here in 2024. So we are super excited to start breaking it all down. What a journey it's been. What an awesome regular season. There was a lot of highs and lows, some crazy moments, a lot of awesome games, teams going up and down all season, a very dramatic season. Definitely one we'll remember for a while, Rob. Before we hop in, anything you want to say anything before we get in?
Yeah, obviously another great NFL season, Lewis, but also a great season overall for the First and Goal podcast. Thank you so much to all of our viewers. I mean, we've hit record numbers this year in our views, likes, comments, and everything. So shout out to you guys for watching the videos that we put out for you guys every week.
All right, Rob. Well, let's go ahead and get into the topics today. Like I mentioned, it is Black Monday. And for those of you who do not know, Black Monday is the day in which a lot of coaches are fired, GMs are fired, as team seasons are over. So it's about time to sit the coach down and say, hey, we've evaluated your season so far, and we just figure it's time to move on. Now, I feel like recently some teams have waited a few days, let the dust clear, and then they made the move. When for the most part, you see like six guys get the axe. So far, only two guys have been fired today, and one of them was right at midnight last night. Arthur Smith and Ron Rivera. Ron Rivera, pretty expectedly. Arthur Smith, kind of wild out of nowhere, but it makes sense. Let's start with that one, Larab. Arthur Smith. Is this the right move by the organization?
I think so. I mean, we've been talking about this guy for the past two seasons about just how much he underutilizes his playmakers, right? Hey, we don't want to give the ball to Bijan Robinson. We want to throw the ball to Jonnu Smith instead of Kyle Pitts. I mean, just an underutilization of his weapons on offense. They've had a really great offensive line in Atlanta, a really underrated line. And so running the ball has always been a great thing for that team. But, when you have guys like Drake Leonard on the outside, Kyle Pitts on the outside, really being able to get those guys incorporated to the offense is just something he never really did. And I will give him a little bit of slack. Having to have Desmond Ridder and Taylor Heineke as your two quarterbacks really isn't going to have the greatest outcome for your team. But still, I think he did not do a good job this season or last season, and he deservedly got fired.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen flashes from the talent that you're talking about with Drake London, Kyle Pitts, and Bijan. And yeah, it has been very confusing on how he's been utilizing the guys because we saw how in Tennessee, when he was the lead guy, it seemed like it was A.J. Brown and it was Derrick Henry getting all the shine. And then you'd get the ancillary pieces doing what they do and just support. So it was weird to see this kind of shift in how he was coaching and, supporting his guys. I feel like the thing that really was the nail in the coffin was the quarterback situation. Ultimately, was the decision to start Desmond Ridder, bench Desmond Ridder, start him again, bench him again, and then finally start him again at the end of the regular season, just ripping his confidence away. And then decision with Marcus Mariota last season as well. And in the 3 seasons he's been head coach, 7-10, 7-10, 7-10. Ultimately, that's not going to get it done as a head coach. You need to see progression. You need to see things going on the up, not on the way down. And with this Falcons team, it was just a bunch of, nothing. They had talent. They could win games. And the decision to keep Desmond Ridder and to, that was your plan at quarterback going all season long. It obviously wasn't going to work for this season. And a lot of that blame also goes on Terry Fontenot, the GM, who built this team, and whoever's decision it was to say Ritter's the guy going into the year. It feels like the owners have decided that it's falling on Arthur Smith, and maybe unrightfully so. I believe, this is just me, Laurab, but I believe if the coach goes, the GM needs to go as well. If they were brought up together, house needs to be clean because then new coach comes in. And then what? Then you're going to fire the GM, and it's going to be this revolving door of who's to blame, who's to blame, who's to blame. And I don't think he should have a job. Former Saints guy, Terry Fontenot. I respect what he did for the Saints organization. And honestly, I'm respecting what he's doing for the Falcons organization too. But I feel like big changes need to be made in Atlanta, starting with Arthur Smith. I do think Arthur Smith still has value in this league as an offensive play caller. I think he does bring a lot of smart things to a franchise, but as the head coach, just seemed like it wasn't the right fit in Atlanta with all the responsibility over there. So maybe he finds another home and a team elsewhere. And we'll get into some of the antics that he was getting into later in the episode. Trust me. Any other thoughts on Smith?
No, I definitely agree with your last point there that he could definitely be a offensive coordinator somewhere else. You talk about his time in Tennessee where they were one of the best rushing attacks, and then you move on over to Atlanta, and once again they have another great rushing attack. So, like you mentioned, he still has a great offensive mind. Maybe I don't think he'll ever have the position to be a good head coach in the NFL. Maybe that's just too much for him to handle. But get that man in an offensive coordinator spot, and we can know he can cook something up.
Yeah, I mean, get him with a good quarterback too. Like I'd love to see him with a starting caliber quarterback in the NFL because so far Tannehill he did the most with, and then you're not getting much out of last leg of Matt Ryan and then Desmond Ritter and Marcus Mariota. So yeah, it's disappointing how, the talent in the season went down for Atlanta, but they did make the right change. And they need new blood, a new voice in the building. As for Washington, Ron Rivera got the boot. We have been predicting this for years now that it's about time for Ron Rivera. And he's a great guy, great human being, good football guy, a guy with a lot of history. Is he a Hall of Famer? Probably not, but he's done so much for the game. Just speaking on positive here. But you needed to get him out of the building. Desperately needed to get him out. The defense was historically awful in Washington this season. The 32nd ranked defense in almost every statistical category. You trade away your two best defensive players. It just felt like a season where you needed to get all the demons out. New owner over there as well. He's going to start making big personnel changes. So you just knew Ron Rivera was not sticking around for another season. Is this his last time as a head coach? I would probably say yeah. He had his moments in Washington, and we know how good of a head coach he was in Carolina. But I feel like at the age he is now, and then the battle with cancer and everything he had, I think it'd be best for him to maybe take a secondary role or even just take a long time away from football before trying to make a return. But overall, great guy. Hard not to root for Ron Rivera, but this was the move for the Washington Commanders to go forward as a franchise.
Yeah, for sure. And then you look at this Commanders team, it looks like they're going to gut everything, like you said. They're going to need all new personnel, and maybe in the coaching room, depending on what they do with their GM situation. I think you said that they fired their GM, they brought somebody else in. And so we'll see what this Washington Commanders team can do. But like you said on Ron Rivera, he's a great guy, but you just didn't want him coaching for this team anymore. I mean, just the culture over there is just terrible. I mean, Ron Rivera, he took a team to the Super Bowl in the Carolina Panthers, but like you said, he's a really good football guy. But in his whole entire career, I think he's only ever had one winning season, to be honest. And so, he'll have a great, he's an awesome dude, fun to root for. But when it comes down to football, he does not. I mean, he has a winning record as head coach, but he's only had one ever winning season. So I
So,
mean,
Laura, correct me if I'm wrong. I believe there's only then 5 coaching vacancies. So now we have the Commanders and the Falcons, along with former guys who were fired, with the Chargers, the Raiders, and the Panthers. So those are the 5 jobs available right now. Maybe more teams, if they lose in disappointing fashion in the playoffs, could also get the axe. And, teams like New England with Bill Belichick rumored to be on the outs, are they going to finally move on from him? It seems like he wants to stay, but he's willing to relinquish some of the personnel decisions that he was making in New England for a while. If you're Robert Kraft, Larob, is it finally time to say goodbye to Bill Belichick? Because do you really think if you bring in a new personnel guy, it's just gonna who would you bring in to say, yeah, this guy knows more than Bill Belichick? Like that's a really tough position to be in if you're a GM in New England with Bill Belichick still there.
this is a really difficult question. Now, I agree with you that if you bring in someone else besides Bill Belichick as your head coach next year. Obviously, you're going to do a way worse job than what Bill can do, but it just might be an end of an era for Bill Belichick. Maybe he just says, I took this team to 6 Super Bowls, or excuse me, I won this team 6 Super Bowls. It took them to a lot more than that. I've been taking so much flack. Everyone's saying this was Tom Brady. I stuck with Mac Jones and Bailey Zappi as my quarterback, and some of that is Bill's fault. But maybe he's just like, maybe it's time to close the chapter on this part of my life and move on to another team, similar to what Tom did, leaving Bill Belichick in New England and then going on to win another Super Bowl. Maybe Bill's like, hey, maybe it's my time to do something like that.
Yeah, and a lot of jobs are popping up, like I mentioned, the 5 jobs. Um, Obviously, a lot of these jobs are, I mean, Eberflus, I don't know what his situation is in Chicago, whether or not they're going to keep him. But as we know of right now, there's only 5. And if you're looking at these different positions, I want to start with the ones that we just mentioned, Atlanta and Washington. If you're Atlanta, my prediction is I would go for a young, defensive minded, intense type of head coach to just go in there, change the culture, strict, regimented, get that thing on a schedule, and then bring in, like, honestly, I don't know. I wouldn't mind bringing back Dan Quinn. Now, Atlanta bringing back a head coach is always a touchy subject, but that type of guy would be really good. Maybe you bring in Mike McDonald, the Ravens defensive coordinator right now, who's doing a really good job over there. He could potentially be a good fit over there in Atlanta. What do you think? And then also, well, we'll get into Commanders for a second. Do you agree with me for Atlanta, or are you thinking of someone else?
Well, how this market goes is, maybe we want a young coach, we want an old coach, but I think it's going to be a lot of these offensive coordinators who are going to really move into these keystone pieces. I know you like defense, but guys like Ben Johnson over there in Detroit, he's definitely going to be moving on. I think this
Is he
past
going to
season,
Atlanta?
but is he
Like,
going
I
to?
feel like
Yes,
he's gonna.
for Atlanta. This is maybe the worst job. If I'm going to be, maybe not. Maybe Washington might
Oh,
be the worst job.
Carolina's the worst job.
Uh, well, I
No,
agree. But if Ben Johnson says, I want to go to Atlanta so I can figure out plays for Kyle Pitts and Bijan Robinson
that's
and
fair.
Drake London, I mean, who's going to stop him, right?
The
And
quarterback
then,
is gonna stop him.
well, when they draft Jaden Daniels at their pick, who knows?
Are they gonna get to Jaden?
Or they trade for Justin Fields, something like that could happen. But the most coveted job is my Los Angeles Chargers.
Oh
That's
yeah.
who we need to be talking about with Justin Herbert. And there's a lot of names in that ring, Lewis. I know we're talking about Ben Johnson, the offensive coordinator for the Texans in
No,
Swerlonic,
Slowick.
uh,
Um,
Bill
oh,
Belichick, and Jim Harbaugh coaching
yeah.
tonight in the championship game. He could be taking a trip down to sunny Los Angeles.
Yeah, I think the Chargers need to go for a big fish. I think they need to get out of the coordinator. They need a former head coach. They need an alpha. They need someone who wants to work with Justin Herbert. And that's Belichick, that's Harbaugh. And I believe they have the potential to get one of them because of Justin Herbert alone. And Harbaugh, win or lose tonight, I feel like he's going to really give this coaching cycle a good hard look. And there's going to be teams, Chicago, the Raiders, the Chargers, who I feel like have the assets to give him. And out of those jobs, I feel like the Chargers you know, is the most desirable. I don't think that's the best opening. I think the best opening probably is Atlanta, to be honest with you, just because of the division, because of the talent, and if you find your quarterback, Justin Fields, you draft a guy, then you could maybe, put something together over there with those guys. But, the Chargers, the other head coaches in the division, Sean Payton, Andy Reid, and if the Raiders hire another blue chip guy, potentially Bill Belichick, Jim Harbaugh,
Well, that's what I
that
want to
would
ask
be
you about, Lewis.
okay.
Do you think this Raiders team keeps Antonio Pierce after the great season he had once he took over, or
I
do
don't
they
think
go
so.
for a big fish?
Now, if this is the Oakland Raiders, potentially. But I feel like Mark Davis in LA or in Las Vegas, I feel like that checkbook, we saw the money he gave out to McDaniels and the money he gave to Gruden as well. He gave Gruden the first $100 million contract for a coach. And if there is a big fish on the market, he's going to take his swings. He's a guy who is not shy. And if I'm a head coach, I would want to do business with a guy like Mark Davis who puts his, money out there. He puts, he wants to have a successful team in Las Vegas. And there's a lot of, negative energy around the Raiders. And I get that. But if you bring in the right guy, you can flip that negative energy into a positive, into a good, tough team in that division. So I think that's also a pretty good job just in terms of Mark Davis is a little kooky, but he's going to give out a lot of money. And in terms of security for a head coach, they have good talent over there, good defensive pieces. Obviously, offensively, they have a lot to work with as well. So, but in terms of, if you're a coach, a lot of people think that the first thing you think about is the quarterback. And that is true. You want a solid quarterback going into any situation. But for me personally, the owner is the biggest thing. Who can I trust? Who will have my back? Who will not just axe me halfway through the season because they drafted the wrong guy at quarterback like David Tepper? I wouldn't want to coach for that guy. The Panthers now are going to get the worst of all the head coaching candidates because of the decisions they've made the past 2 seasons. And we thought we'd maybe see the same for Houston, but it seems like, they just had the luckiest offseason of all time, and they found their guy in D'Amico Ryan, so they're all set. But no, out of the positions, I would probably rank them because I really like Arthur Blank. I think he's a great owner over Atlanta. I would say Atlanta, Los Angeles, Las Vegas. Who's the other team that doesn't have a
Washington,
guy?
then Carolina.
Washington and Carolina. Yeah. Do you agree with that?
And I have to switch the Chargers with Atlanta.
Purely because of Herbert. Is that what you're
Purely because
saying?
of Herbert. Purely because you have a top 5 quarterback who can cover up a lot of blemishes. Even if you come in and have a bad start or whatever, Justin Herbert can give you an extra year as a head coach in the NFL. You saw how long Brandon Staley was able to maintain his job over
True.
there in Los Angeles, and I don't think that would happen anywhere else.
That's fair. That is fair. That's a good point. I do like that point because they do not like firing head coaches over there in Los Angeles, and especially if it is a guy on the caliber of Jim Harbaugh, it's gonna be really hard to fire him after a few bad seasons. So they'd rather move off Herbert than Harbaugh. So you might have a Russell Wilson situation. Um, but let's go ahead and talk about teams who didn't fire their head coaches but also didn't make the playoffs. We would consider them just big disappointments on the year. 3 teams that stick out to me, Laraib: the Jacksonville Jaguars, the New Orleans Saints, and the Seattle Seahawks. 2 of our 3 teams, including the Jags in there as well. Given the choice, which team do you think disappointed the most this season?
Oh, most definitely Jacksonville Jaguars. Now, I like the Saints and I love the Seahawks, but this Jaguars team, Lewis, who we were expecting a huge leap for Trevor Lawrence coming to this year, a huge leap for their connection with his head coach, and they just didn't take it this year. They had a good start, or excuse me, they had a terrible start, but they picked it up and they just ended it horribly in games that they should have won. Now, they did have a really tough, last couple of games, but to lose 5 out of your last 6 when you just needed one more win to get into the playoffs is just quite frankly embarrassing. And you bring in Calvin Ridley in the offseason, you look at all the hype that he had, and he just wasn't utilized to his full potential, right? Him and Trevor Lawrence never just got on the same page. Their running back and Travis Etienne, great start, finished terribly, right? Their defense, which we already thought was lackluster, really just kind of fell apart towards the end, especially in this must-win game against the Tennessee Titans. I mean, just a disappointing season from the start, middle, and end, to be quite frank.
Yeah, I agree with you. And out of these 3 teams, I am also picking Jacksonville. And it's not like they had some murder rows of teams at the end. They were legitimately just playing like a bad team at the end of the season, where it was, yes, you can say Trevor Lawrence did get injured in that Cincinnati game. And then from there, that's when the losing streak really started and he never got fully healthy, which is a completely fair argument. But the defense was also falling off. Some of the play calling, especially down the stretch in that Tennessee game, was just wild. It seemed like Trevor Lawrence was being asked to be Superman, and he didn't have his cape because he was injured and he couldn't really do much. And now you're having tough conversations about guys like Doug Peterson, Trevor Lawrence himself, and it's a really awkward situation for Jacksonville, who, don't forget, maybe 5 weeks ago, we were having conversations talking about could they potentially get the 1 seed in the AFC. I mean, that's where they were 8-3. And to be sitting here at 9-7 and out, or 9-8, excuse me, and out of the playoffs is an utter disappointment. And it looks really bad for a team that was on the up and up and we thought would really make some noise following last year. And in the NFL, if you're not going up, you're going down. And they have regressed from last season. So when you regress, what is it? What are the changes that need to be made? So there's gonna be a lot of good questions. I don't think you fire Peterson. I think he's done a lot of good things for Jacksonville, but this could be a situation where, you really start to look at yourself in the mirror and say, where do we go from here? Is Trevor Lawrence the guy? Because he's about to get paid this offseason. So we'll see if, how confident we are going into next season. And like you mentioned, some of the pieces on the outside, guy like Christian Kirk goes down as well. I'm not, this is not all on them. There's unlucky things. Christian Kirk, huge part of the offense, goes down. And they had injury bad luck. They lose a left tackle. Guys in the defensive secondary get injured. A lot of this is also unlucky. So I don't want to dogpile on the Jags, but when you are this division favorite and you have such an ample opportunity to make, you win a game here, one game there, and you're in, and now to be sitting outside of the playoffs watching as a team who is, supposed to be a step below you in the Texans take the division from you, and now that, all the AFC South is rising. Tennessee had their valiant effort, but the Colts, they're getting Anthony Richardson back. They're going to be better next year. Year 2 with Stroud and Will Anderson and D'Amico Ryans, they're going to be better next year. So all of a sudden, the AFC South is a more competitive division. So for the Jags to really fumble it this season is a huge disappointment when they could have had such a great team.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head with all that, Lewis. But another disappointing team is your New Orleans Saints. And I feel even more disappointed in them than I think you are. Because this was a team last offseason that I predicted that could make some noise in the NFC playoffs. We looked at how bad this division was with Baker Mayfield coming in after a bad season, with, drafting the Carolina Panthers draft Bryce Young, and you think, he's going to have a bad rookie year, but that they play even worse than expected. The Atlanta Falcons with the quarterback carousel and Taylor Heineke and Desmond Ridder all moving in and out, and you thought, or I thought, this New Orleans Saints team is going to bring in Derek Carr, Chris Olave year 2, Michael Thomas healthy, Alvin Kamara one more year, and it all just falls apart from the get-go. I mean, we talked about the red zone inefficiencies of this team that just continue to hamper this team all season long. And a defense that was playing really well in the first half of the season, Lewis, we talked about how great that secondary was, and then a defensive line that couldn't generate any pressure at all. I mean, in what could have been, I still think this is the best roster in the whole NFC South. But for this team not to make the playoffs and have a team like the Bucs make it in with Baker Mayfield as the starting quarterback, I mean, that's just really disappointing.
Disappointing for sure. And it's funny when you look at the Saints, they're 4th in the NFC and total, point differential. They have a plus 84 point differential on the season, despite, only being one game over 500 at 9-8. And they just could not beat good teams for the life of them. They beat one playoff team this entire season. That was the Tampa Bay Buccaneers 2 weeks ago. And you can make the argument, if this was a, college football playoff committee, the Saints are playing like the best team in the NFC South right now. It just sucks that it feels like the offense is finally hitting a certain level. Last 4 weeks of Derek Carr have been pretty damn impressive. I'll be the first one to admit that I've liked what I've seen from him. And it seems like he was relying a lot on Michael Thomas early on in the season. I'm not making that a Michael Thomas issue. That's all Derek Carr. But he was just kind of trying to find himself in the offense. Pete Carmichael had a very conservative style and very just frenetic, bombs on third and short and midway through the field. But he's played very clean, very efficient football. But it's like too little, too late. And that's the disappointing part about it, Laraib, is you've seen high ceiling moments from this team. You shut out the Patriots 34-0 on the road. I don't care. It's the Patriots. That's still an impressive victory on the road in New England. You have these huge performances against teams, this late into the season. You just dropped 48 points in your final game of the season. And for it to be like, sometimes the defense would be awful in games like against the Vikings or against the Rams and against the Lions, or sometimes the offense wouldn't show up. Like in the first game against the Falcons, first game against the Bucs, it was always just so frustrating. And now we're sitting here with the, good finish to the season with Dennis Allen is still happily employed. Derek Carr seems like he's not going anywhere with his contract, which maybe you can argue as a pure optimist, you can say they had a good end of the year. It takes a new coach, new quarterback time to figure things out. They had younger pieces on defense. Next year going into it, don't give me that. This was your year. You had the easiest schedule in the entire NFL. You had one of the better rosters with high value older players. I can guarantee you next season you will not have Michael Thomas. Guarantee you. I can almost say that you will not have Marshawn Lattimore on your team next year. Alvin Kamara probably won't be on the team next year. Cam Jordan, unfortunately, probably will be on the team next year. So there's a lot of big, personnel decisions that you're going to have to come up with because it's time to move on. But they're still stuck and just trying to be this mediocre, let's make the playoffs and see what happens. 9-8, 8-9. That's all you're going to get by continuing to roll this ball down the hill. I am not calling for a losing season. I'm calling for a change of guard, a change of scenery, get all of Sean Payton out of the building. No more Dennis Allen, no more of this old guard team. You need to get younger, you need to get more professional, soft rebuild, and you get right back at it. And it's disappointing because, yes, the division is bad, but you can't rationalize all your big picture decisions by saying, oh, well, we could win this division. Yeah, well, guess what? You're going to get dominated in the playoffs because the other teams with better divisions are better teams, and you're going to get destroyed. So was this season a huge disappointment? For some, I would say yes, I am disappointed, but I'm more disappointed in the fact of how it ended, that you win your last game of the season, so you give yourself a worse draft pick. You give someone who is directly competing with you a better draft pick who also needs a quarterback. So a lot of big decisions to make up in this upcoming draft. Honestly, if I were the GM, I'm probably running it back at this point because of the situation that we're in. But that's my Saints spiel. That's my 2023. Oh, and one quick thing. Arthur Smith, and Dennis Allen as well. What pissed me off so much yesterday. So, obviously at the end of the game, Saints get a pick that goes all the way to the 1-yard line. And, you need the ball. There's 1 minute left. You kneel the ball. Game's over. Jameis Winston instead decides, he asked the guys, he's like, let's get Jamal, who led the league in touchdowns last year, Jamal Williams, his first of the season, just so this isn't like the worst year ever for him. And they decide, now a little shitty, they lined up in victory formation, which is like defensive players know, like, all right, I'm going to concede. I'm not going to give full effort. And then they run out of it. Like, that's kind of shitty. I'll give him that. But that's it. And then for Arthur Smith to be all pissy about it. And then for Dennis Allen to apologize to your biggest divisional rival in the Atlanta Falcons and say, I'm so sorry. I want to apologize to Arthur Smith and the Falcons. That was not intended. That was those mean players of mine who don't know how to behave themselves. Like, that is on you. Don't throw your players under the bus like that. And I love how Jameis responded. He's like, I asked the team. They're like, was Dennis Allen involved? He said, I asked the team. And for him to still be Dennis Allen around these guys is a travesty. And Jameis probably going to be gone because of it. And I'm not saying, that's that consequential going down the road, but just an utter exclamation point on how detached this team is from Dennis Allen and how much of a chaotic mess this whole season has been for New Orleans. There's my soapbox.
And it's not like Dennis Allen is like, oh, this is his second year in New Orleans, right? He doesn't know the culture. This is a guy who's been on the Saints for a long time, who knows about the rivalry between the Saints and the Falcons, and still goes out there and says, oh, my bad, Falcons. Like, oh, man, that's not part of the game.
Don't beat us too bad next time.
I mean, that is straight bull crap out of Dennis Allen Lewis. But moving on to my team, who had a disappointing season. I mean, I don't even know where to begin, right? We had a really young defense from last year. We brought in Tariq Woolen, one of the best cornerbacks in the league, and we drafted Evan Weatherspoon. And we're like, okay, this secondary is going to start ticking off. Jamal Adams is going to come back from injury. Quandre Diggs is going to have another Pro Bowl year. And from the get-go, it looked bad. Now we're halfway through the season. Tariq Woolen's getting benched because he's not giving effort. 50-year-old Bobby Wagner still has to lead the league in tackles because his team doesn't want to draft linebackers. We have Jordan Brooks coming in after the ACL tear, having to do so much more than he's able to do. And then on the other side of the ball, we give Geno Smith $110 million, and we think, okay, you know, we have the 49ers in our division, but the Rams, Matt Stafford's getting a year older, and Kyler Murray's going to miss most of the season with the ACL tear. You know, it's a weak NFC this year. Let's go out and just do something, right? Let's go do it. We're going to draft Jackson Smith and Jigba with 11th overall pick. You know, later in the first round, we're going to have Kenneth Walker come in for year two. And those two guys on offense were our only two bright spots, I'm going to be quite honest. Now, I love DK Metcalf as much as the next person, but this guy is such a cry, whine, baby bitch. I mean, if I'm going to be really honest. Now, I have his touchdown ball right there in my room, but this guy is so fucking annoying, okay? He'll go out there, he'll give effort, whenever the other cornerback's locking his ass up. He'll drag that cornerback to the ground, punch him in the face, give him a little stiff arm. But when the season is on the line and you need to do something in that game against the Steelers, you come up short, you loser. Geno Smith, we gave you $110 million and you regressed from last year. You completely regressed. You can post all these videos on Twitter all you want, talking about, oh, I'm the average quarterback when you escape a play against the Commanders and make a good throw. You regressed, man. You went down from last year. And this offensive line banged up all year. Pete Carroll with his still run pass concept that hasn't looked good in the last 5 years. I mean, just a terrible season for the Seahawks. Now, why I have them less disappointing than the Saints and the Jacksonville Jaguars, just because you already knew you weren't going to win the division with the 49ers in there, but still just a bad season overall from the defense, from the offense, from everywhere.
Yeah, I mean, they were a team with a lot of hype entering the season. If you're, I mean, I know you remember, but like, I remember hearing like, oh, this is the youngest defense in the entire NFL, and how they improved and how they played at the end of the season. I feel like they're going to make that jump coming into this year. And that was the biggest disappointment, was the defense. Not getting many sacks at all this season, except for, Owe, who had this crazy stretch of or Mafe, excuse me, of just having a sack like every game. But then just not consistent pressure. And then you start to think, like, did we really need another cornerback? Witherspoon has been solid his rookie year, but you think of a guy like Jalen Carter, who could have really helped the middle of that defense, who we were saying on draft day, potentially him. That didn't work out for them, obviously. And then, like we mentioned, Geno, how good is he? I wouldn't say he turned back into a pumpkin, but he just didn't give you the consistent play that he did last season. And it's hard to expect that from a guy like Geno Smith. So do they keep him going into next year? A lot of big questions, but I would say they're disappointed in the fact that they were always in that playoff hunt and they just could not beat some of the better teams. And they got embarrassed a few times, likely against Baltimore, against Dallas, or not. Or you can say they got disappointed. I don't know. But there were games against the 49ers twice where it was just like
I
they
guess
don't
the
even belong on
Rams
the same
twice.
field. Right. And that was the biggest shock. Week one, it was like, oh, is that a sign of things to come? It turns out, yes, that was for both teams. So very disappointing from the Seahawks. I would say I'm a little more disappointed in them because I had higher expectations for them as a ceiling team. I thought they might be able to compete with the 49ers going into the season. Turns out not the case whatsoever. But that'll wrap it up. Did you have any final remarks on the Seahawks, Saints, Jags? All right, well, that's going to wrap it up for the disappointments of the year. Let's focus on some good things. And one of the good things from last weekend, Laraib, Buffalo, Miami, a really exciting Sunday night football game. Came down to the wire, 21-14. Miami seemed like they were in control the entire first half and entering the third quarter. But then Buffalo gets a huge punt return touchdown, swings the momentum. Miami just could not stay on the field in that second half. Buffalo goes down, gets another touchdown, takes the lead, and they end the game on a Tua pick at the end. What is your biggest takeaway for both teams in this game? Starting with the Bills, choppy up and down roller coaster game from Josh Allen, the full Josh Allen experience, two awful red zone interceptions, a red zone touchdown that was bounced off someone's helmet, toe drag swag, a beautiful dime to Diggs, and then just a stupid fumble that was ripped out from him. The full Allen experience, and then at the end of the game, he converts a 3rd and 16 with his legs to ice the game. So is this style of play sustainable to do 4 weeks in a row to go to the Super Bowl, Rob?
See, that's the exact thing, Lewis. I mean, when you have to face teams like the Chiefs and the Ravens and not the Dolphins team, of course, Is it going to be really? It's going to be really difficult for this Bills team. Now they've been playing really well. They've been managed to win games, but I think they're really going to struggle because when these Josh Allen mistakes come for you late in those playoff games, it's just going to mean a lot more. I mean, all those turnovers. If you give that ball to the Ravens, they're not going 3-and-out with Lamar Jackson and Zay Flowers and is Isaiah Likely. They're marching down the field. They're kicking a field goal or they're scoring a touchdown. Now, is there path? Is there a path? Is there a way I see this Bills team making it all the way off of Josh Allen? If you can play a clean game, just 4 games, he plays clean. That most definitely you can see the talent is there. But do I think that they can march into Kansas City? Yes. But could they march into Baltimore? I think not.
Well, they won't need to march into Kansas City, thankfully, because now they secured the 2 seed in the AFC, which was probably the biggest takeaway from last week or from the game last night is the winners secured the 2 seed, and both these teams had such a huge home field advantage, which didn't seem like the case for Miami last night because all those Bills fans were loud as hell in that stadium. You couldn't hear anything. But I'm just happy that the Miami Dolphins didn't win, so we didn't have to see this game again next week. Really good playoff game, but we'll get into those. As for Miami, Laraib, it just feels like what a lot of these injuries mounting, especially on the defensive line, just in these high stakes games where it's big boy football, they just always fall short. Whether it be, it seems like they're running the ball super well and they're doing a really good job. Achane was balling out, and obviously no Mostert, no Waddle, but it feels like that second half, they just 3-and-out all passing. They just had no ball control whatsoever, and they just got away from the run game. It's just the identity for this team. I feel like they try to get too cute sometimes. When it comes to playoff time, how much can you trust this team?
Not a lot. And I think this is about the ceiling for Tua this year. I mean, with Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle, I think this is as great as we'll ever see him. I don't think we'll ever see him get any better than this. And maybe they get a stacked offensive line. Maybe if the run game gets even a little bit better than this, if they can get somebody who can pick up those cheap first downs between the tackles, maybe they can get a little bit better from this year. But I think this is about as far as they can go, Lewis. I mean, you had the division in your hands and you lost the game against the Buffalo Bills at home, really. Now with all the Bills fans there, maybe, but maybe if you had more fans over there in Miami. But no, I
That's
think
Tua's fault.
this is about as high as this team can go.
Yeah, we agree. I just feel like they're walking into a buzzsaw in the playoffs. Like I feel like this is Tua's first playoff experience. You can say that. You can say maybe another year. But ultimately, it just feels like there's a hard ceiling to this team that they need to break out of. So I'd love to see them shock me. I just really don't think, especially with all the injuries mounting up for them, it's going to be a really tough task to go into Kansas City and play a great playoff game. Because now you're on the road. Though, even if you beat Kansas City, then you got to go to Miami or to Buffalo, to Baltimore. It's just going to be a gauntlet from here on out. And I just don't think that they can play this high level, high octane, high speed football 4 weeks in a row because it's not sustainable. And we're seeing that now as it comes to the last stretch of the season. The last 2 games against high tier AFC playoff teams, they just have not looked impressive whatsoever. But Laraib, that'll do it for our week 18 recap, Black Friday, talking about some eliminated teams. But before we go, we have the full playoff set for us, Laraib. Super wild card weekend. Your 2 buys in both the conferences, number 1 seeds. We talked about this last week, but just to remind you, San Francisco in the NFC and Baltimore in the AFC. And here are the matchups, Laraib. On Saturday, first game, you have the Cleveland Browns traveling to Houston on NBC. Give me a quick 2 sentences. What are you looking for in this game?
Joe Flacco versus CJ Stroud, the old man versus the young rook, Nico Collins versus Amari Cooper. I think this is going to be a fantastic start to the playoffs. A great Cleveland defense versus a young Texans defense. I think this game is going to have everything. It's going to have long bomb touchdowns and defensive stops all across the board. This is going to be a really fun game to watch.
Yeah, that's interesting. Well, we'll get into more of the previews and predictions in our next episode. So let me just go through all the matchups for you real quick. Then we have Dolphins at Kansas City Chiefs. And if you didn't watch a second of 1 second of that game last night, you would have no idea this game is exclusively streaming on Peacock. It's exclusively streaming on Peacock. This game is exclusively streaming on Peacock. So if you
Exclusively
want to
on
watch this
Stream
game,
East.
yeah, hey, you know they're always listening. Um, so yeah, if you want to watch that game, go ahead and dust off your Peacock app that you haven't touched in a while. Hopefully, they'll give you a free trial. Just make sure you cancel your subscription. Then next up on Sunday, 3-game triple header. We have the Steelers at Bills in the noon slot. We have the Packers going to the Cowboys in that 4:30 slot. And then finally, the night game, you have the Rams going to Detroit. And then Monday night, you have the Eagles traveling to Tampa. Out of these games, Laura, which game are you the most just excited to watch as a fan?
Has to be Rams at Lions. I mean, Matthew
Yeah.
Stafford returning to Detroit has to be the best game of the week, but close second would be CJ Stroud versus Joe Flacco for the reasons I already mentioned. But no, Matthew Stafford going back to Detroit. It's going to be an awesome atmosphere for sure. First home game for the Lions in a really long time. This is just two great offenses matching up against each other, along with some young defenses. It's going to be really fun to see who wins that one.
Yeah, I'll be honest with you, Laura. I'm looking forward to this Eagles Bucks games just for the reason of both these teams have been playing some pretty awful football, and it'll be the worst, lesser of two evils. Who's going to win this game? So it'll be really exciting to see who we pick in some of these matchups. Some of these games are going to be pretty close. So, wipe the slate clean, Laraib. It's postseason time. New batch of picks will be unleashed, and our next episode, Laraib, I feel like we'll be filming it together. I'll be coming to Houston, so make sure y'all stay tuned. We are super, super excited to be going into this playoff setting, especially with y'all. Thank you so much for the support all season long. It's been an awesome season, and we're going to go full throttle for these playoffs, starting with Super Wild Card Weekend, and we're doing something very special for the Super Bowl, so stay tuned for that. Rob, you got anything before we head out of here today?
No, I think that's the First and Goal podcast signing off.
Peace.